A project does not become intelligent merely because it finishes. It becomes intelligent only when its experience changes the way the next project is executed. That distinction matters. Most organizations claim that they capture lessons learned. They conduct a workshop near project closeout, populate a register, circulate meeting minutes, and archive the file. Then the next project repeats the same planning gaps, coordination failures, interface disputes, design rework, procurement delays, and commissioning problems. That is not organizational learning. That is organizational memory loss with documentation. A lesson learned is not simply something that happened. It is knowledge gained through experience that can benefit another person, team, or project when it is shared, understood, and applied. The critical word is applied. You have not learnt a lesson because someone wrote it down. You have learnt it only when it changes a future decision, process, control, behavior, or technical practice. Think about your last project. What did your team do differently that produced a better result? What caused unnecessary rework? Which interface was underestimated? Which assumption proved wrong? Which review occurred too late? Which technical practice should become standard? Which activity should never be repeated in the same way? And most importantly, what exactly should the next team do differently? That is the real starting point. Lessons learned should not be treated as a closeout ritual. They should be captured progressively throughout project execution. The earlier a lesson is identified and applied, the greater its value. A lesson captured during detailed engineering can still improve procurement, construction, and commissioning on the same project. A lesson captured only after everyone has demobilized may become an interesting historical observation, but it has lost much of its operational value. Progressive capture is therefore more powerful than retrospective memory. You can capture lessons during design reviews, project meetings, risk workshops, interface discussions, supplier evaluations, site activities, commissioning reviews, and phase gate assessments. You do not always need a major workshop. A short discussion can generate a valuable lesson if the team asks disciplined questions. What happened? Why did it happen? What was different from what we expected? What worked unusually well? What created avoidable effort? What should be repeated? What should be changed? How should it be changed? Who needs to act? Without these questions, project experience remains personal. When experienced people leave, the knowledge leaves with them. That is one of the largest invisible losses in engineering organizations. A senior engineer knows that a particular package interface will become a problem unless responsibility boundaries are frozen early. A construction manager knows that a certain sequencing decision will create congestion. A commissioning engineer knows that test documentation must be developed months before energization. A project manager knows that stakeholder alignment cannot be postponed until execution. But unless that knowledge is converted into a reusable lesson, the organization continues depending on individual memory. This creates fragile performance. The lessons learned process should convert personal experience into organizational capability. It should capture both positive and negative lessons. Positive lessons are not compliments. They are practices that produced a better outcome and deserve to be reused. Perhaps your team involved operations personnel earlier than usual and eliminated late maintainability changes. Perhaps you aligned supplier data requirements before purchase order placement and reduced document delays. Perhaps an integrated model review exposed constructability problems before site mobilization. Perhaps early engagement with a specialist prevented an incorrect technical assumption. Those are valuable lessons because they identify repeatable practices. Negative lessons are equally important, but the purpose is not to assign blame. The purpose is to define a positive action for the future. A useful lesson does not say the vendor was late. That is an event description. A stronger lesson says critical supplier document milestones were not linked to engineering dependency dates. Future purchase orders should identify the documents that control downstream design and apply progress measurement and escalation against those dates. Now the lesson can change behavior. A weak lesson says communication was poor. A useful lesson says disciplined interfaces were managed informally, resulting in conflicting design assumptions. Future projects should establish an interface register, assign owners, and review unresolved interfaces during regular coordination meetings. Specificity creates reusability. Vague statements create no action. You must also distinguish a genuine lesson from routine non-compliance. When an existing mandatory procedure was not followed, the issue is not automatically a lesson learned. It may be a nonconformance requiring formal quality investigation, root cause analysis, and corrective action. Suppose an approved inspection requirement was ignored. The lesson is not simply inspection should be performed. That requirement already existed. The immediate issue is failure to comply with the management system. The deeper investigation may still reveal a reusable lesson about unclear responsibilities, inadequate training, weak verification, or impractical workflow design, but noncompliance must not be disguised as learning. You must also separate lessons from business as usual. A project does not generate a lesson because standard systems were followed and the project performed normally. Saying the project succeeded because we used the approved engineering system is not a lesson. That is expected practice. A lesson requires some form of transferable insight. Something was done differently. Something should be repeated. Something should be changed. Or new information was discovered that another project should understand. Formal lessons learned workshops remain important, especially near the end of a project phase, but they must be structured properly. A productive workshop is not an open-ended conversation where participants repeat complaints. It is a facilitated examination of project experience. The team should first identify the major areas where meaningful learning occurred. These may include project management, engineering, procurement, contracts, construction, commissioning, quality, risk, safety, information management, customer interfaces, suppliers, scheduling, cost control, and organizational coordination. Previously captured lessons should then be brought into the discussion. Progressive capture and formal workshops must connect. Otherwise, the team ignores months of recorded observations and relies only on recent memory. Lessons should then be grouped by business process, discipline, or technical topic. This makes patterns visible. You may discover that several apparently unrelated problems came from one systemic weakness. Repeated design changes, supplier delays, and site queries may all trace back to poor definition of technical interfaces. Late approvals, schedule slippage, and procurement disruption may all originate from unclear customer decision timelines. Commissioning delays across multiple systems may reveal that completion requirements were never integrated into engineering deliverables. Grouping lessons turns isolated symptoms into management insight. The most important workshop step is determining the action required to make the lesson real. Ask one hard question. What must change so that the organization behaves differently next time? Does a procedure need revision? Does a checklist need a new verification point? Does a design template require improvement? Should a risk prompt be added? Does a standard specification need clarification? Should a training module be created? Does an engineering workflow need a new approval stage? Should responsibility be reassigned? Does the lesson require communication to a specialist community? Is the lesson project-specific, location-specific, or broadly applicable? Every significant lesson needs an action pathway. Some lessons will require formal process improvement. These are lessons that reveal a need to change the management system, engineering procedures, standard tools, templates, specifications, or workflows. Such lessons should be submitted through the appropriate improvement process as early as possible and always before project closeout. Waiting until closeout is dangerous. By then, discipline leads may be reassigned, specialists may have demobilized, and the people who understand the issue may no longer be available to formulate the corrective action accurately. The relevant technical or functional lead should help prepare the submission because the quality of the lesson depends on technical precision. A process improvement request written by someone without sufficient context may describe the symptom but miss the actual mechanism. Other lessons may not require a system change. They may be project insights, local conditions, customer-specific considerations, regional constraints, supplier experiences, or execution practices that future teams should understand. These lessons should still be entered into an accessible lessons database or knowledge system. A lesson hidden in a closeout report is effectively lost. It must be searchable, categorized, and connected to the people who may need it. This is where many systems fail. Organizations focus heavily on capture, but weakly on retrieval. A database containing thousands of poorly classified observations does not create knowledge. It creates noise. Every lesson must contain enough information for another professional to judge whether it is relevant. The project context matters. The originating location may matter because some lessons are driven by geography, culture, regulation, politics, logistics, or local working practices. The customer sector and industry matter because a lesson from one operating environment may not transfer directly to another. The business process, discipline, and specialization matter because they determine who should review and apply the lesson. But the most important fields are the issue, background, and lesson. The issue explains what actually happened. The background explains the conditions that allowed it to happen. The lesson explains what should be done the same way or differently in the future. Do not merge these into one vague paragraph. For example, the issue may be that instrument index updates repeatedly arrived after cable schedules were issued. The background may reveal that package vendor data dates were not aligned with disciplined and deliverable dates, and interface ownership was unclear. The lesson may be that future projects must establish vendor data dependency dates during planning, assign interface ownership, and prevent dependent deliverables from being approved against uncontrolled inputs. Now, another project can understand the event, the cause, and the required change. Ownership is equally important. A lesson without an owner is an opinion. An action without a due date is an intention. A database entry without review is storage. You need accountability for evaluation, action, communication, and closure. The owner must determine whether the lesson requires a process change, technical review, broader communication, local application, or simple retention for future reference. Then comes the most neglected part of the entire cycle, reuse. The value of lessons learned is realized at project initiation, not merely at project closeout. When a new project begins, the team should identify relevant lessons from similar work. Similar does not mean identical. You may search by project type, customer, geography, industry, technical discipline, contracting model, execution strategy, supplier, technology, or risk profile. The team should involve experienced people from recently completed projects wherever practical. Their contribution is especially valuable during early risk workshops. A database can provide written information. An experienced practitioner can explain context, warning signs, trade-offs, and implementation details that may not appear in the formal record. Imagine beginning a complex project without speaking to anyone who recently completed comparable work. You are voluntarily choosing to rediscover known problems. That is not innovation. It is avoidable repetition. Relevant lessons should be converted into project controls. Some should become risks, some should become opportunities, some should become assumptions requiring validation, some should become actions in the project execution plan. Some should influence staffing, contracting, procurement strategy, design reviews, supplier surveillance, construction planning, or commissioning philosophy. A lesson saying that late operating input caused major redesign should become an early stakeholder engagement action. A lesson saying that package interfaces were repeatedly misunderstood should become an interface management control. A lesson saying that supplier documentation delayed engineering should shape purchase order requirements and expediting priorities. A lesson saying that a particular workshop prevented downstream rework should be deliberately repeated. This is how learning becomes execution. Higher risk projects require greater discipline. Formal review of applicable historical lessons and a structured workshop before key personnel demobilize should be treated as essential project governance. Timing matters. Conduct the closing workshop while people still remember the decisions, constraints, and consequences. Hold it before the project team disperses. For phased work, review lessons before each major phase closes, not only after the entire project ends. A project may need separate learning reviews after concept development, detailed design, procurement, construction, and commissioning. Each phase creates different knowledge. Design teams should not wait for final project closeout to communicate engineering lessons. Construction lessons should not remain at site until the next project has already completed its design. Commissioning lessons should feed operating readiness, handover planning, and future design criteria. Learning must move faster than the project lifecycle. As an engineer or manager, your role is not merely to report what went wrong. Your role is to transform experience into improved technical and organizational behavior. Do not ask only what happened. Ask, what will we change? Do not ask only who made the mistake. Ask, what conditions allowed the result? Do not ask only, where should we store this? Ask, who must use this and at what decision point? Do not celebrate the number of lessons captured. Measure the number of lessons applied. Measure how many resulted in process improvements. Measure how many were reused during project initiation. Measure whether recurring problems declined. Measure whether good practices spread across teams. The maturity of an organization is not revealed by the size of its lessons database. It is revealed by the reduction of repeated failure and the deliberate replication of proven success. Projects generate experience automatically. They do not generate learning automatically. Learning requires capture, analysis, ownership, action, communication, and reuse. Miss any one of these steps and the chain breaks. Capture without action becomes documentation. Action without ownership becomes delay. Communication without context becomes noise. Storage without retrieval becomes an archive, and experience without reuse becomes waste. The next time your team says, "We learned a valuable lesson," challenge the statement. Where is it recorded? What caused it? What will change? Who owns the action? When will it be completed? Which future projects need it? How will those teams retrieve it? How will you know it was applied? That is the discipline of lessons learned. It is not a closing ceremony. It is a continuous engineering and management system for turning project experience into better decisions, stronger processes, lower risk, and more reliable execution. Your project should not merely deliver an asset, system, or facility. It should also leave the organization more capable than it was before the project began. File site, turn file 0,